Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here today. So today, let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. Basically, this is the idea that when you're out shooting, certain things might not be perfect, whether it's the sky, the mood, whether it's something you think is happening like a nice sun flare coming through the trees, and then once you get into the processing part, you see that it's not as bright that you want it to be. Maybe you're shooting in some fog and you want it to be even more foggy or less foggy or have more fog in one certain area. With Topaz products, we have several different plugins that are going to be able to help you complete that initial vision that you had when you were shooting. And again, sometimes you're not there at the right time of day, and sometimes it's just not the right feeling once you get it into your post-processing. So this is just a few things to maybe help those post-processing steps go a little bit quicker and maybe give you some ideas on how to really complete your own vision that you had for your shoot. So today we're going to be going over a few different types of tasks. The first is we are going to be adding some fog into this rolling hills image over here. We're going to be adding it into just a little bit of an area, such as we did here with this after image up front, where you see in this before image, it's not up front, you don't see any fog. And then we're also going to paint in fog to create some really dramatic fog, because it might not just be dramatic enough for you. Then we're going to also be talking about this sun flare over here. Sometimes you might have an area where you're shooting into the sun to get some certain effects, but when it's coming through the trees, it looks like a blown out area and it doesn't look as sun flary as you might like. You can create some really natural sun flares and rays with star effects. So we're going to be talking about that, how to quickly go in and add something like that to your image. And then we're going to be talking about how to basically change the entire feeling of an image, like we did here with this abandoned house, replacing the sky and doing some dramatic toning to give a whole other type of appeal to it and maybe really get what you were trying to go for during that shoot. We also have a couple other things we can go over during the question and answer sessions, but these are the three main tasks we're going to be focusing on here today. So let's go ahead and start off with this fog image. I'm going to go ahead and just close out of here. We are going to be working within Photo Effects Lab. I've just gotten really used to it at this point, and it's very simple to do within all the tasks that we're doing. It's very simple to do within Photo Effects, so we'll be sticking in here today. But our plugins are compatible with Photoshop, Photoshop Elements, Aperture, Lightroom, iPhoto, many other programs as well, such as Paint Shop Pro, so you can check that out. The only one you have to be kind of aware of that has its own compatibility is Remask. It needs a layered programs such as Photo Effects Lab, which we're in here today, Photoshop, Photoshop Elements, or Paint Shop Pro. So let's go ahead and grab the image to start off with here. Go ahead and open it on up. Let's see here, our first image here. All right, this is the initial image that we're going to be working with, which is a really nice image. It has already been processed to a degree. And my intention, my goal with this image is to add fog first, just to quickly add it up front to give a little bit more fog in the foreground and kind of complete that image. I feel like we're kind of missing some here. And then showing you how to actually go in and get really heavy fog in between these hills and just paint it in. We're going to be using lens effects, and then just to finish it off, we're going to be using Topaz Adjust. So the first thing that I'm going to do is duplicate my image here by coming down to this lower right and going duplicate. Same type of workflow that you might have in Photoshop or Photoshop Elements with your layers. That's basically what we're going to be doing. And now that I have a second layer, instead of going into Topaz Adjust or any other program that is going to change the color or tone of my image, I'm first going to go into lens effects to add in this additional creative element that completes this image for me. The reason being is if I took this image into, let's say, Topaz Adjust and added a more sunsetty or sunrise type of tonality to it, it's going to change the tone of my fog and make it a warmer fog, and then I'm not going to be able to add in a realistic type of fog from lens effects, because lens effects is going to add in a white fog. So add that element into your image first. That's a little tip for you. So I'm going to go into, let's just go ahead and get into our plugins tab here, and I'll just go ahead and jump onto Topaz Lens Effects. All right, it'll just open up Lens Effects here for you. And I'm actually already in my fog filter. If you're unfamiliar with Lens Effects, very similar to the Adjust and black and white type of interface where you have your effects over here on the left, top left, then you have the presets on the bottom. The difference with Lens Effects is that every single effect that you choose, it's going to have a different type of menu over here on the right. So you can apply these and actually stack many different types of effects, but it changes, whereas Adjust and black and white effects do not. They have a static adjustments over here on the right-hand side, but this actually changes with every single type of effect that you're trying to get. So let's go ahead and go into our fog filter first, since that's the first thing that we want to do. Now within the fog filter we have several different fog simulations for fog filters, realistic simulations that you might get with those older, or they actually still have them, fog filters that you can place on your camera lens. So you can just scroll through these and see if it's something that kind of stands out for you. These first four, the fog 1 through fog 4, are going to be more in the middle of the image and the top of the image, and then the ground fog will start to come into that foreground, more that lower half of your image. And you can just scroll through these until you see something that you might like. I kind of like this ground fog 3, which is just going to add it up front for me. Here's before and after. The way that you scroll from before and after or toggle back and forth is with your left mouse button, either your spacebar key, or you can even come up here to these tabs just to look at the before for a while and then click on over to your after. You can also look at this in a split screen mode where you can see your before and your after on the left and right. Okay, so over here on the right hand side is where our adjustment panel is, where you can actually go in and figure out and change this fog to exactly where you want it. My goal is just to add it in this foreground area for this first little workflow. And right now this current preset is going over on top of my hillside here a little bit too much. It's going on top of my house a little bit too much. So I want to kind of back off on that and see if I can take that down. You can actually really easily maneuver the fog around within this fog adjustment. There's not many sliders to really work with, but that kind of is a good thing. It makes it really intuitive and you don't necessarily have to play with a bunch of different things. The first thing that I like to do sometimes is to take my transition down. My transition is going to be how harsh the line is from the actual fog effect to no fog effect. So you can really take that transition and make it a very long transition, or you can make it a very short transition. You can also change the amount of the fog, which is going to give it that more heavy effect as you go up, or less heavy as you come back down. Now because this is from a higher vantage point, I don't want to have too much fog because I don't want it to be unrealistic. So I'm going to take that down just a little. The region size is also going to come up into the image versus coming back down. And the way that you tell where the fog is very simple. Let me go ahead and take this region up, the transition down, the amount up so you can really see. This effect position button here on the bottom, all you do is you click it and you can put the effect exactly where you want it. Throughout Lens Effects, we have tons of different effect type filters, such as the diffusion filter or the tone filters or the pinholes, the different types of blurring and creative focusing that you have. And all of those will have an effect position button where you can just say exactly where you want it. So I want to have mine down here at the bottom, so that's where I'm going to click. We also have an angle slider, which is going to basically put that fog effect at whatever angle you choose. I want 180, so I'm going to put it right back down to 180, so it'll just be a horizontal line. And then we have a diffusion slider. The diffusion slider is going to tell the effect how blurry it should make what it's sitting on top of. If you have no diffusion whatsoever, you'll see right through that fog effect, and you'll get complete detail and really not have any sort of blur or any sort of diffusion going on with that area. Well, within natural fog, as you can see over here between these hills, in the fog area you do have some blur and diffusion going on. It's just something that's naturally occurs. So that is why we have this, and you can just take that diffusion slider up until it's something that works for that effect. So very quickly, let me take this region size just a little bit down and the amount down. There we are. So very quickly we have been able to add in fog to our foreground. Here's before and here's after. I'm not even going to get out of lens effects. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right on into the next thing I want to show you, which is how to actually paint in fog in a very dramatic way. This is going to be helpful when you're trying to create almost your own type of vision. Maybe there was barely any fog, or maybe there wasn't any at all. So you can use this technique to kind of get that more dramatic, misty morning effect. The way that we're going to do it here is by coming back up to our fog filters up here, which are going to be more on the top. Really doesn't matter. I'm just looking for something that's covering a lot of the image. So this fog 4 effect works great. It's pretty heavy and it covers a lot of the image. And so I'm just going to come over here to my right side of the adjustments, and I'm going to take my region size up. What I'm trying to do is cover as majority of the image as I can with kind of a heavy blanket of fog. And then I'm going to go in and actually paint away or paint in the fog. You can do it in either way. I choose to paint it in. My transition, I'm going to take that. This looks pretty good. And my angle will stay the same. My diffusion working pretty good here. Here's before, here's after. It's a little foggy. So now that we have this effect, I'm going to go ahead and get us back into Photo Effects Lab. Now you can do this next technique with any sort of layered program you have, such as Photoshop Elements or Photoshop, PaintShop Pro, anything that might have layers or the ability to give you a mask. So basically what I'm going to do is on this duplicate layer where we've created this extra foggy effect, I'm going to click on my mask and come up to my mask menu up here. I'm just going to click invert. And when I press invert, it's going to take my mask, instead of white, which is completely see-through, it's going to turn it black, which makes it 100% solid. You can't see through to this effect, to this layer. So now what we've basically done is just taken this layer and made it, you can't really see it at all as in your main viewing area. So now what we can do is use our masking brush tools. So I'm just going to take my brush value, 0 is black. I'm going to take my brush value up just a little bit past black, maybe at about 20. That's going to give me a really dark gray, and it's going to allow me to paint in very realistic fog when it's at this very low value. Now my brush size, I'm going to take this down. We'll start at the back of this image and just paint in from the back forward. So I'm going to take this brush size down. The hardness I'm going to leave all the way down. I don't want a hard brush whatsoever. I want really soft feathered edges. My flow I'll probably take a little bit down, maybe about 0.8. That's basically how quickly this brush value is going to be coming out of my brush, and it'll allow me to have a little bit more of a natural transition as well. And I'm going to leave my edge aware down at 0. This is really the star of our masking tools, but when you're working with something like this, when you're wanting really soft edges with this fog, you're not going to want edge aware because it will become too sharp on those edges. So now that I have this kind of going, now I can just start painting in fog exactly where I want it to start coming through. And it's going to take a while to start seeing the effects. And I'm just painting along this top edge, just doing a couple things here, kind of following along where the natural line of fog was anyways, coming in through these hills, painting in a little extra fog. You can get really dramatic with this, or you can be more subtle like I'm doing here. And I'll show you real dramatic in just a second, but first I wanted to show you this more subtle type of look you could do very quickly. I'm just going to take my brush size up as I get closer to this foreground, because as I get closer I get more fog within these hills. And I'm just painting it in right along where it already was, kind of avoiding the areas where it wasn't. You could go the other direction too. You could start off with the very, very foggy top layer and just paint out where you don't want the fog, but this is going to be a little bit better for me. Now I'm coming into the very top foreground. I'm going to take my brush value up just a little, and I'm going to paint in some here in this foreground. Maybe around my house just a little. All right, so very quickly we've been able to enhance that fog. I know it's kind of difficult to see, but let me show you the before and after. Here's before and here's after. Again, before and after. So that was a very subtle effect. Sometimes it might even be better to take that brush value up a little bit more. I'm going to take that brush size back down and paint in a little bit more dramatic, more obvious effect, and then work with your opacity if it starts to become a little bit too much. So we can kind of work with that. Try just a little bit more dramatic here so you can really see the difference. Taking my brush value up just a little bit more and my brush size up as I get closer in. Oops, that wasn't. There we go. Now you can really start to see that coming through here. So this is basically just a tip on how to add more fog into your image using lens effects and a layered program. Now again, you can do it within lens effects quite easily by working with just certain areas and creating that effect with the effect position button, or you can paint it in like we're doing here. Here's before and here's after, and just make it a little bit more dramatic if that's what you'd like. Now at this point, to finish it off, as I said, I'd just go ahead and jump on into Topaz Adjust. I want maybe more of a little softer of an image, and I think let me try this. I'm just going to push from stack. The from stack layer is going to give me a new layer that has all of the changes that we did to both of these layers, and it's just going to basically make a copy of what we were viewing. Now it's its own layer, and I don't have to worry about this mask and all of that type of worrying about how it's going to affect it. Now if I just hop into Topaz Adjust, I can go through some presets, or I can just work with the adjustments over here on the right. That's a little too strong for me. Could go with a lot of color with this boost type of preset. Here's before, here's after, but I think I want that French countryside preset. I'm a big fan of that for more soft looks like this, and it really enhances the diffused look and just kind of gives it a nice ethereal, very smooth type of look. Here's before, here's after, and I am done. I'll just press OK, get back on into Photo Effects Lab, and here is before and after. So really enhanced that fog, and we also created a nice little smooth effect with that French countryside preset. All right, the next one I want to talk about is actually a very, very simple workflow. We're going to talk about that sun flare image. So I'm going to just open that on up. I don't need to save this. I already have it saved. Now we'll go ahead and open this image up. So this is just a really nice, beautiful color type of photo. Definitely has some processing done already. And again, we're talking about these finishing effects. So within this image, after processing, there are these really nice lens flares happening coming from the sun. I think it kind of enhances the image, but it just doesn't have as much as a sun flare as I would have liked. So with star effects, you're easily able to add in some rays and a little bit more of a sun flare and just enhance this. So it doesn't just look like a blown out area. It actually looks like there's an element of interest. So it's something you can kind of think of that way, or at least I do. Let me go ahead and duplicate this layer again, and then I'm just going to go ahead and get into Topaz Star Effects. And within Topaz Star Effects, it's basically the same type of interface as the rest of our programs, with our preset preview up here on the top left, all these presets that you can kind of scroll over. The interesting thing with Star Effects is most of these presets are not going to look perfect for your image because it does not. These presets were created at a different size image, so maybe this Jewel Sparkle one is going to look really good on a certain type of image with jewels and a certain size image than it would on this particular image. Obviously, this is a little obvious, but it's very simple to come in and change the size. So what I suggest to people is they find, the type of effect they want, and then they come into their main adjustments over here and they actually change the size with the size slider and actually get the correct size that they want and the right luminance that they want, which is going to be your brightness and how strong that effect is. Within Star Effects, though, we do have 4 sun flare presets over here that are actually really quite good. I like them. They're pretty effective because they usually only go to your brightest light source within your image, which usually, especially if it's going to be a blown out area like your sun, it's going to directly go to the sun. So if you go before and after, it's kind of difficult to see it right now because it's a more natural type of an effect, not really a star effect, but a glowing effect. Again, here's before and here's after. You can go through these and see which ones might be more effective for you. I already know that I'm a fan of this sun flare too, so I'm going to go here and see if it works for this image, kind of play with a couple settings. But here's just the preset before and after. There are times when you might get a couple more sun flare type of spots within your image, so I always suggest coming into your star settings first when you're adding these sun flares and going to your stars only mode. The stars only mode will allow you to see exactly what's happening with the effect itself, because sometimes it can be really difficult to see if you have one effect, if you have 2, if you have 3 stacked on top of each other, and this is one way to view it. It looks like we are good, that we just have one sun effect coming from that spot that we want, so I'm going to go back to the combine to actually play with it from here within the image so I know exactly how it's supposed to look. All right, you can change your star type, but I'm just going to continue on with this sun flare type of preset. This Hollywood star is a very realistic type of sun flare. I'm going to go into my main adjustments, and my size is already up all the way, which I can't even see my flare of the stars, and I kind of wanted a little bit more rays. One way that I could get that is by taking my luminance up. And you'll start to see, as you take your luminance up, a little bit more of these rays coming through. Now, one thing that's great about working with Photo Effects Lab or within any sort of program where you have layers and you can play with the opacity is you can make these really large, bright rays like this, then go back in and take that opacity down a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to have to work with the luminance, but that kind of starts to take away some of the effect within the point. So I am going to take my luminance quite up, and I'm going to come to my color adjustments, and I'm just going to saturate the color a little bit more with the sun effect itself so it doesn't look as blown out. It actually gets some tone in there. So you see it starts to become a little bit more saturated with the colors behind it versus when it's not saturated. So that's a good technique on how to get some of that natural feeling back into these effects or elements that you're adding into your image. So adding quite a bit of saturation to get some color on those rays. And I'm pretty much done. I'm going to say okay, and I know it does look a little bit out of not very realistic at this point, but again, working with the opacity slider, you can come in and you can take that opacity down on the layer that you just created that star effect with, and then you have a much more realistic sun flare element that you very quickly added into your image, right where it really didn't have a lot of interest up in this area where the sun was coming through. So here's before and here's after. So that's a very quick workflow for star effects. I'm going to go ahead and move on now to our more extensive workflow that we're going to talk about today. One of the most common things that people always are asking about, and I know a lot of landscape photographers who find themselves shooting on a day that doesn't have a really dramatic sky or not great light, and they really can't get back to that location again, you know, they kind of have to shoot with what they have available at the time. And sometimes it's not what you're envisioning in your head, and that's what the whole idea of today is about. So that's what we're going to talk about now, is replacing the sky in kind of it's a beautiful blue sky actually, but when I see this abandoned house, it seems a little bit more moody than this setting that we have going on here. This light is very midday, just coming straight down. It's not a really good light to be able to work with, but there are several things you can do with this image pretty quickly to get a more moody, very dramatic type of scary atmosphere, I guess you can say. Just something a little bit more over the top, and that's kind of what I envision for this, just to play around a little. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is replace the sky. And I'm going to replace the sky with a sky that fits within the color scheme that we're working with here right now, in the sense that I'm going to replace it with a sky that has really high clouds and has a blue sky, not a sky that's purple or any sort of off sky or off color sky that you'd really have to match this foreground to. You can easily do that too, but what I'm going to try to do first is get the sky in there to look pretty good, and then do a stack layer which will combine all of my elements, the background and the foreground, and make one layer, and then we can go and continue to work with those adjustments and tonalities and contrast to really make it all blend together really nicely. So let's go ahead and replace the sky first. The way that I'm going to do that is just come and duplicate my layer again. And the first thing I'm going to do is go and try to cut the sky out of my image using Topaz Remask. So Topaz Remask is our masking tool. We do have a masking tool within Photo Effects Lab, but I can already tell when I first edited this image, I could already tell that this sky was so bright along these edges that there was going to be definitely some color bleeding issues going on. And sometimes Photo Effects Lab doesn't handle severe color bleeding too well, so I wanted to come in here and kind of show you how you would work with something that has really bright edges like this that are kind of difficult in certain masking tools. So let me go ahead and go a little bit further in. We'll start over here on actually I'll just come out and just do a quick one. So if you're unfamiliar with Remask, basically it's on a tri-map type of technology. Tri-map meaning 3 colors. You have green for keep, red for cut, and then you have this blue color for the compute area. And so this blue color you just put along the edges that you want Remask to work for you and let it do its job. So I'm just going around these edges here. Okay, just coming around, and I'm filling in a lot of this extra space around these bushes or around these vines, because you can really see through to the background there, and just finishing off. And I'm going to say cut on the top here, and I'll go ahead and just immediately just say compute. All right, so it looks pretty good. Happens pretty quick. We do have a little areas that we can clean up around the edges, which we'll do here in just a second, but let's take a look at what we've got going. So if you come over here to your top right, you can look at this in several different ways. You can look at it in a split screen view where you can look at, let's say, your image and then your keep area, or you can look at the quad view, which will allow you to look at in all 4 of our views, which are going to be the tri-map, the mask, the keep, and then the original image over here. So let's go ahead and go back to the split screen view. I kind of like that a little bit better. I'm going to go to my mask and my keep view so I can kind of see what's going on. Okay, immediately I notice, which I was suspecting was going to happen, I have a halo going around my keep area. So it did a nice cutout, but then it has this kind of glow from the original sky color. And again, that's just the color bleed from that sky, and it's difficult in a lot of programs to get rid of. Within Remask, it's actually quite easy. You can just click or go down here to your foreground color area down at the bottom left of this adjustment panel, and you can take your recovery slider up. You can tell over here on the left, especially, as I take my recovery slider all the way down, you'll see there's quite a halo going on, and as I take that up, it starts to disappear. But over here on the right, I still have the halo going on, especially around my leaves of the trees and everything like that. So we do have something called a high quality recovery, which is going to do even more. It's basically going to do the same thing that the recovery slider does on its own, except it's just doing it much stronger and really, really getting rid of that background colors. It's definitely separating more from the background to the foreground. So now that it did its compute for the high quality, I just take my recovery slider up and just keep an eye over here on the left as I do this again. It's pretty awesome. Let me go back all the way down to 0-ish. You'll see that halo around everything, especially around the leaves over here on the right. And as I take my recovery slider up, it just disappears. It's awesome. All right, so now that I've kind of gotten rid of that, which is pretty simple stuff, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my mask one more time and just clean up a couple things. I'll go ahead and take a look at the overall image here. Get my brushes. If you see some areas along your mask, like we do over here on the left, that are a little bit translucent, it can be difficult to see over in the keep area, but just kind of fill those in by clicking on those, and they'll just kind of fill up to the edges. It's really easy to just get those completely solid. So again, over here on the left, you'll see that it's a little translucent right here. It's easy to get that. Let me go ahead and look at my image, actually, to make sure I don't. There we go. Okay, and you can tell it just filled in over here on that keep area. Okay, let's take a look at the mask one more time. Fill in just a little bit more on my mountains, and I'm just going to come up to my rooftop here. And you'll see over on the right as I do this, it just kind of fills it in a little bit more, making sure that we're getting all of those elements. I see it on this, we're definitely missing quite a bit, so I'm just going to take that down, and there we go. Okay, so I'm not going to go too exact here, but you get the idea. It's quite a simple process here, which is really nice when it comes to masking and trying to replace your skies. So let's go ahead and process that and just say okay. All right, so now I'm just going to take that bottom layer and turn it off by just clicking the little eyeball, and you can see that we've cut out our foreground and just taken out our sky. Now I'm going to click on the layer below, and I'm going to add another layer in, and this is where I'm adding my sky layer in. When you're adding a sky layer into your cutout foreground like we have here, you want to be below that layer. So that's why I came to the layer below, and I'm just going to say from file, and basically that's just going to add in another layer from my file organizer, wherever that is. And let's see here, I'm going to navigate to my desktop. I actually have a collection of skies from Layer Cake Elements, and they have some great skies sometimes. I'm going to go to this high clouds, and I think it was the high clouds number 4 that ended up working so well for this. So I'm going to click OK. That's just going to be placed into the layer stack above the layer that was highlighted. So now we're below the foreground, and you can see that that sky is already starting to be replaced. You can easily use tools to move and scale the sky layer to make it really fit within the image. So I'm going to go to scale first and just scale it on up. go to my move tool and kind of figure out what might look best here. I don't really know. Just checking it out. And actually, I'm going to take that scale back down just a little. Okay. Maybe go to my move tool one more time and see how to get a little bit more of a dramatic, stormy sky there in the background. And then we have a pretty good simulation of where the sun might be. It's coming in, it's hitting the tops of these clouds, so maybe above, directly above the house, it's still a little bit clear. So we can kind of even simulate that a little. So it's almost like the clouds are coming in. That'll work for us. All right, so now we have our foreground and our background, but we have a pretty big issue going on with the foreground. The foreground definitely has a significant blue cast going on in the mountains, and it doesn't really feel like the light in our foreground is matching what would be coming from our sky in this type of atmosphere, especially, you know, these blues aren't matching up, so it's a little off. One tool that I love is Topaz Detail, which will take certain tones and actually make them darker or lighter. It won't change the tonalities necessarily or change the colors. It'll just make it lighter or darker, which I guess is changing the color, but it's not, you know, oversaturating or anything like that. It is not going more green to purple. It's just going lighter to darker. So I'm going to actually take my foreground in, and that's it. And let's see here. Yes, that is what I'll do next. I'm going to take just my foreground in by just clicking on that layer, my foreground layer, and going up to Topaz Detail. Now it will take the full image in because it's a non-destructive type of workflow over here. Basically what we've done is we've just put a mask on this layer, but that layer still has the background in there. So don't be worried when you see the background come in if you're taking in just a part of your layer into one of the Topaz plugins. And really all you want to focus on if you are taking in just a portion is that portion. Obviously we don't want to focus on the sky or look at what's going on there. We're just looking at the foreground, and I'm really looking at the cast of color that's going on in the mountains in the background. So I'm not even going to come over here to any of my presets. I'm not really worried about doing any sort of detail enhancements at this time. I really just want to work with the tone options within Topaz Detail. So the tone options I'm talking about are the cyan red, magenta green, and yellow blue sliders. Basically, if I take my slider, let's say I'm starting here in this yellow blue, if I take it to the right, it's actually going to make my blues lighter and my yellows darker. If I take it to my left, take it to the negative, it's going to make my blues darker and my yellows lighter. And that kind of is going along with the aesthetic that I'm wanting a little bit. So I'm losing that really kind of lighter blue and getting a little bit of a darker blue going on here. I'm not worried about the sky or anything. Again, I'm just worried about the mountains and my foreground, making sure that everything's kind of lining up the way I want it to. In the cyan and red slider, I'm going to do the same thing. So if I want my cyan to go darker, I'm going to go to the right, kind of opposite of where it is. And again, my mountains are going a little bit darker. So that's kind of in the area that I want to work with. And then the magenta and green, I can either make my green darker with magenta lighter or the green lighter with the magenta darker. I think I'm going to go with my green a little bit darker. Not paying attention to the sky. Here's before, here's after. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to say okay. And okay, so we've kind of made a little bit of a better thing going on here, but it's still pretty blue cast going on. So here's what we had before, and now here's after. So I'm still not too happy with this. Basically what I envision and what I think would be correct or visually correct would be a much darker type of brownish or just darker mountain. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to come to my brush tools within Photo Effects Lab and add in some burning into those mountains and really just darken them up. So let's see here. I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and actually take this at this time, not work with the mountains. I'm going to work with the adjustments on my foreground and my background first, and then I'll make a composite layer where I'm putting everything together and then work with the adjustments from there. So while they're still separated, you can separately adjust your foreground and your background. Just make sure that you're on that highlighted layer. I'm just going to go to my adjustments real quick. Here I'm on my foreground. I'm going to go ahead and take my temperature up a little bit towards the yellow, and that's going to take some of that blue out, but I'm still in a good spot here, so there we go. That's great. Add a little bit more magenta in. That magenta and yellow is really helping to get those mountains to start looking a little bit more normal. Then I'm going to take my saturation, I'll take that up just a little, not much though. I really don't need it to be up at all, actually. Okay. Play with my exposure. Maybe take that down a little. My contrast, if need be. I'm pretty good without doing my contrast at this point. My dynamics, which is a localized contrast, I will take that up just a little for this foreground. Then I have sharpness, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. I'm going to basically leave everything else alone and come to my background layer. My background layer, I'm just going to look at my temperature of the sky, maybe make that a little bit more towards the warmer side so it can start to match up with those mountains. Maybe make the tint a little less magenta. We'll see here. It's kind of starting to go in the right direction. And maybe take just a little of that saturation out. The exposure I can work with as well on just my sky here. I can change my contrast. And I'm just going to take my contrast down a little bit on my sky. Maybe take the dynamics up just a tiny bit. Take my highlights and whites down just a little, just to get rid of anything that might blow out as I continue to work with it. Okay, so now that I'm a little bit happier here with everything matching up, I'm still not matched up yet, not yet. We're almost there, and then I'll go ahead and take your questions. I'm now going to go on to the from stack. The from stack, again, is going to make a layer of everything that we've just worked on all below, and now everything is combined into one top layer. So here I'm just going to go ahead and go to my burn and dodge tool like I was talking to you about. I'm going to go ahead and maybe go to about negative 0.4 strength, and that's towards my burn side. Take my brush size down a little. My hardness can be a little bit increased. Flow can be all the way up, and my edge aware is now going all the way up. And now that my edge aware is up, I can click on this mountain range here and come around and not worry about going into my sky or my foreground and just work with this mountain area on the left and right. Let's take that strength down just a little bit more, and I'm pretty much happy. Okay, but you get the idea of how to kind of blend it in a little bit more. As far as blending foregrounds and backgrounds like this, I also suggest that you use some sort of smoothing or desaturation along the edges. We have a good smoothing tool in here as well that just kind of smooths it off and makes that transition a little bit more natural. So I'm going to take that brush size down, the hardness all the way down, flow all the way up, edge aware all the way down, and just come along these edges, especially just within mountain range area, not necessarily within the house or the foreground. Just make that a little bit more natural of a transition. Now, just to make it a little bit more moody, I can do several different toning techniques within Photo Effects Lab, or I can just hop on into Topaz Adjust or something like something like that, and really get a very interesting tone going on. I'm actually going to go into Topaz Adjust 5 this time. I went into Instatone a little while ago, but I think I want the Film Collection Lomo preset, which I just really love. The Lomo 2 sometimes will give you a nice kind of interesting look. And it's a little strong, but a lot of these presets you can just remember that you can take the opacity level down within the program itself, even if you don't have a layered program. So you can just come to the transparency and the finishing touches and take that up. So you bring in some of that original image. Maybe you want to take that vignette strength down. You can just open up your vignette, take that strength a little more towards 0. And I'd like to actually put the vignette center more on the house itself instead of the center of the image. So I'm just going to click on the center button and come towards the house. And it just kind of hops on over there. And that's kind of a way that you can, several different techniques to make these images much more moody and really start to get that look that you're envisioning whenever you're in the atmosphere or in the area when you're shooting, when you don't necessarily have the light or the background that you're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you guys now. I hope this gives you some ideas on how to add in extra creative elements into your image, like fog, star effects, sun effects, and clouds, different backgrounds, different tonalities, to create exactly what you're seeing in your mind when shooting. So I'm going to say, okay, get back into Photo Effects Lab and take a look at your questions. Tom would like to see how we can selectively sharpen and blur a photo. Sure, Tom, not a problem. Actually, I think you asked this before I went over this process, but we actually have a smooth and detail brush. That is one way to do it within Photo Effects Lab specifically. Each program that you use these plugin hosts through, might have their own ways of doing it, but for us, with this particular host, it's going to be the smooth and detail brush. As you go to the left of your strength, left is going to be your negative side. It's going to be smoothing. As you go to your right, it's going to be adding in detail. So let's add in some detail maybe into our roof and the actual structure here and show you that. Now again, we do have edge-aware technology, so when you have something like a sky as your background, you really want to avoid putting any extra texture into your sky. You want that to be pretty smooth and be natural. So putting that edge-aware technology on is going to be really great. Then taking that brush size up really doesn't matter as long as you keep the crosshairs of your brush directly on the color you want to adjust. It will go really well. So I'm going to take this hardness up just a little. I'll keep the flow up. And I'm brushing in quite a bit of detail here so you can kind of see right along the edges of that bush there, along their roof line. And I'll do it before and after so you can really see it. So I'm just going along the front of the house. Now this is pretty strong, but this is how I would do it within Photo Effects Lab. Okay, and here's before. Oops, that's way before. You can tell, let me reset the mask and you'll see that everything goes back down to a smoother area. So I'm just going to reset the mask and all that sharpness within the house just goes away. So I hope that gives you an idea. Let's see here. Joe would like to see the before and final image of the house. Sure. So the before is before and after. Raphael would like to know if we can create a manual glare within Photo Effects Lab. Raphael, you can. I'm going to suggest that you take a look at our YouTube video. It is an archived video on how to put star effects or glow effects into your image when there isn't actually a light effect there. So sometimes you might find in certain images that you really want I think I've saved this before and after, so I'm actually just going to go back into an image that we have here. Let me go ahead and open. New. There we go. So let's say we had this tree image. And right now there's actually a very nice natural sun flare happening off of the sun. However, if you wanted to enhance that, you could take this into Star Effects and work with it there. So again, maybe you want to just add in a little bit more. You could do something like this and work with all the adjustments to really get it going. Now let's say you want to actually put a sun glare or any sort of flare or any sort of something maybe happening along this tree line. Maybe you want a little bit of a natural glow happening and it's really not working for you. When you see these presets, you see that it's all going to be coming kind of from the trees up here. And that's just because that's going to be the lightest area within your image, and that's where it's going to apply the effects. Now, if you wanted to apply it down here, you can easily add in some manual dots, such as something you would create in Photoshop. You could just pinpoint little dots with a paintbrush, make them a little bit wider than the skyline, and put some glow effects along that, and you could really easily do that. Again, it's kind of a quick tutorial. It's actually a Quick Tip Thursday tutorial, so it's only about a 10-minute tutorial, so you can see how that's done. But it is already on YouTube. Just look for the Star Effects webinars. Richard, great question. He says, what is the advantage of using brush value rather than flow to determine the amount of effect laid down with each brush stroke? I think that especially within our, let's go ahead and open the .pfxl. That's our layered file for this Photo Effects Lab layered file. So I have this layered file created before that's still here. So here you can see this is actually just painted in with brush strokes. The difference between using the brush value versus the flow, obviously if the flow is at 100 or is at 1.0, wherever your brush value is, it's going to go to that full strength of the brush value. So let's say your brush value, you had it up at about mid-gray for this and you just weren't sure if that was going to be good for you. You could come in and you can see it's pretty obvious as you get through here. With the flow, let me reset this, or not reset, let me just say undo. With the flow, if you had that at 0.4, you could come in here and layer in certain areas, but not have to come in and change your brush value. So you could keep your brush value a little bit high, only put one stroke in the areas where you want it to be lighter, and then you can kind of just keep layering it where you want it to be a little bit more thick, and it'll really start to get that complete brush value out. But that's really where I see the benefit of using the flow, is whenever you have certain areas or certain masks or anywhere that you're really using these brush tools where you need to put a little bit less transparency in one area versus another transparency. Instead of having to come up and change your brush value all the time, you can just layer on with this flow brush certain amounts of strokes over and over and over again until you get it as thick as you want it to be. So I hope that makes sense. Anthony, he says, if you want more fog in an area you've gone over, can you go over that area again to get more fog without changing settings? Anthony, this would be a good reason to have this flow down. So let's reset the entire mask here. And I'm going to go ahead and invert it. We're working on the second layer here. So again, if you have, let's say, you take your brush value all the way up to 255. Basically, you'll be painting white, which is 255, on a black mask, which will give you completely 100% transparency to this layer. So all of a sudden, it'll become completely, not transparent, it'll become completely opaque. You'll see everything. So let me show you when your flow's up at 1, this is 100% flow. And let's take that hardness up a little. And I'd make one stroke. Over here you'll see, I'll take my hardness up reset that. Okay, there you see in this top right, that is the full strength that we are going to be able to get from adding in fog in this particular area. If I was to now take my flow down to, let's say, about 0.1 even, I could come in and, oops, now my hardness is really, let's take that flow even further down. I could start with a really low flow as opposed to a high one and a low brush value, and instead come in and just put one stroke where I want it to be light, put 2, 3, 4 strokes where I want it to be dark. So it really is the way that you would rather work. But Anthony, this is a great way to work if you don't want to continually go up and change those brush value settings. This will allow you to just kind of keep layering on top of each other, getting more thick and more thick and more thick until it reaches that 255 white value. And you can really see how it works. I'm going to make it really thick over here on the left here. And you can see over here in the actual mask that there's a lighter area versus a darker gray. And that's really what you're seeing is as I paint on top of this area again and again and again, it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter until it will get to that white value. Let's see here. Jack would like for me to show the rainbow effect in Star Effects. Sure, it's not really a rainbow effect, Jack. It actually makes a rainbow type of glare, which is a very realistic type of color aberration that can come off of a street light, for example. Let me go ahead and open up. No, let me go to my Star Effects webinars. This is one of my favorites to show, because you can really see what happens. This already has kind of a natural element, or definitely a natural flare coming off of it, star effect. If you, let me go to fit here. It's a little bit, there we go. You can also see a little bit of a rainbow effect occurring. It's a little bit warmer, and as you get out, it gets a little bit more dark, and then it just kind of has a couple different colors going on. Let's just hop on into Star Effects to see how you could enhance it. Instead of doing, well, let's see here. What do we have? We have lamppost 1 and lamppost 2. Let's go ahead and go to lamppost 1. See what happens. Okay. Lamppost 2. Kind of like lamppost 2. We'll go with that. And as you can see, all these others were brought into the image because of our threshold settings. So all you have to do to get rid of that is come over to your main adjustments, take that threshold slider up until you start to just have it on your largest light sources that you actually want it on. Now you can take that luminance down to get a little bit more realistic, spread up maybe take that size down. Who knows? You could really play around with this quite a bit. I'm trying to, you know what I want to do? I want to actually change the star to a Hollywood star. Yes, that's better. Here's before, or maybe not. We show before, there we go, and after. Okay, now it's pretty bright, it's pretty luminance, it's pretty, there, that's a more realistic one. Maybe we can take the size up from there. And maybe take the spread up. Okay, that'll work for now to show this rainbow effect. I forget exactly what I was showing. So you can do the saturation levels from the actual light sources themselves. Sometimes the saturation, as you can see in this lower one, it'll pull a really interesting, because it'll pull from the pixel that it's bringing from, and sometimes it has a bit of a magenta tint or some sort of other tint. So sometimes you can take that saturation out and then just add in temperature. You can have a cooler effect or a warmer effect, something that might work for you. And then you can come in and do the rainbow strength. The rainbow strength is going to add in a rainbow effect. So you can take this really high, and then you can take that frequency up, and you can really start to see that rainbow effect in this particular effect now, and then just take that strength down to make it more natural. And you see the variation of the glare coming off of that rainbow effect. So it just becomes a very natural type of effect coming off of there versus something that's just doesn't really seem all that natural. Here's before, here's after. All right, everybody. It looks like I got through the majority of the questions. Thank you guys so much for coming today. Bye-bye.